group Terror Free Tomorrow. He's also the author of the book Terrorists in Love, True Life Stories of Islamic Radicals. He comes to us tonight from Washington, D.C. Thanks for joining us here in the War Room, Ken.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
So tell me, what implications does it have that Tsarnaev won't be charged as an enemy combatant?
Well, I don't think it has any implications whatsoever. You know, the record at Guantanamo for convictions is poor, whereas the record every terrorist tried in the United States so far in our federal courts has been convicted. I, in fact, prosecuted terrorists as a federal prosecutor. So I think this is a tempest in a teapot. He's a U.S. citizen. Let him be tried in our courts. Let the world see our justice system and let justice prevail and not operate in the shadows of Guantanamo, which accomplishes nothing but perhaps making somebody feel good that they're being treated harshly there.
Yeah, that sounds like an absolutely reasonable and right way of doing this. Let's go, though, to the penalty, forgetting whether or not it's enemy combatant or not. The death penalty, not legal in Massachusetts, but could that still be in play under federal laws? Absolutely.
The statute that he's being charged under has a penalty of potentially death. There is a federal death penalty, so he could face the death penalty depending on how the government decides to proceed here.
And is that a call made by the Justice Department, or does the President have any input?
That will be made by the Attorney General. That's correct.
Okay. So, Ken, investigators are reportedly using what's called rapport-based interrogation techniques, meaning that they build rapport hoping he'll cooperate. How exactly does that work?
Well, that's something I did as a prosecutor, and that's something that I did for my book, where I interviewed over 100 members of al-Qaeda and the Taliban, including people who fought in Chechnya. And you develop a rapport with people. You develop a way of communicating. You spend a lot of time with them, and hopefully they'll trust you, and hopefully they'll open up. And a lot of these young men who engage in these acts of terrorism do so out of a sense, this may seem paradoxical to us, but do so out of a sense that they're doing good in the world, so that they want to share that with you, and they do tend to open up, even though they may see you as the enemy. That tends to break down with good interrogation, not torture, which is ridiculous, frankly, never yields anything, but that kind of rapport and talking to someone, treating someone as a human being, ultimately enables them to open up much more than any of the techniques that have been adopted in the past by us.
It's so interesting. You alluded to the idea of they believe they're doing good in the world. Do you guess, like, even in the cursory way that we know this suspect right now, do you guess that he was thinking that he was doing good in the way of his leader, and in terms of his brother, who it seems was kind of the ringleader of all this? And again, I'm saying this without any hard evidence of that, but that's just the picture that's being painted today.
Well, that is my sense. I mean, as I said, I've interviewed more than 100 people who were very similar, young men between the ages of 16 and 30. It's an interesting phenomenon. That's what they all share in common. They're young men. They get wrapped up in this ideology where they think they're doing good in the world, that they're helping people, that they're serving God, that they're serving a greater cause. And usually this comes from some kind of deep crisis in their own life, a sense of alienation, a failed love affair, a difficulty with their parents or in family conflict, and then they seek this ideology, they become immersed in it, and they feel like they're doing the right thing. They don't feel like they're doing the wrong thing. So a lot of times people say, well, what kind of callousness that a young man can walk into a crowd with a bomb and see an 8-year-old child and explode it. But yet in his mind, this is all about how he's helping God, serving God, going to go to heaven when he's done. And it's an ideology, and it's an all-encompassing ideology that lifts people up who have problems, lifts young men who are vulnerable and makes them feel powerful. Not that dissimilar from what may happen at Columbine or Newtown or Aurora, where we see the same phenomenon just in a different guise.
You know, it's interesting to draw those conclusions. I see it more at Columbine than I do at Newtown, but you are the expert. Let's talk about these brothers. You know, the Tsarnaev brothers, do they fit the profile of the young terrorists you've interviewed? I mean, does anything in their story or their history surprise you?
Not particularly. So many young people, young men and we have to be clear about that, who do these acts are very normal and appear outwardly normal, there are no warning signs, so the people are surprised by it, or they were such nice people I never would have suspected. That's fairly typical. You know, the only thing that seems a little bit surprising or a little bit out of the ordinary is that they weren't surrounded by more people. That may come out. There may be other people involved in this, but this tends to be more of a group activity, and that is a difference. And Michael, you kind of alluded to it with the Newtown killer. He was very solitary, and the one in Aurora as well. These activities do tend to be buttressed by a group. More than people who self-radicalize over the internet. It does tend to be more of a group dynamic, and perhaps this was just a group of two, the two brothers. But I suspect that when the full story comes out, that we'll find, at least maybe in Russia when the elder brother went back there, that there were other people involved in some way that facilitated this whole thing.
And that would make it more typical. You know, they're talking, you talked about interrogation versus torture. They do something called a sedation holiday, where they lower his sedation so that he can be questioned. Does that blur that line a little bit or not?
Yeah, I don't know the details of it. I think they need to be careful about that. Because the problem is, if he's too sedated, he may give them unreliable information. And that's also the problem with torture. If you torture someone, they'll just say anything to stop the torture. It's not necessarily the truth. So you have to be quite careful with that.
Okay, well, I only have 344 more questions for you, Ken Ballen, but I don't have the time.
You can ask them all, quickly.
Ken Ballen is the president and founder of Terror Free Tomorrow. Thanks so much for coming on into the War Room.
My pleasure, Michael.
Now we turn